Hello, and welcome to a calm and relaxed talk about the Insidious films. I gotta keep it quiet because it's spooky season. It isn't actually spooky season, it's the middle of July. Or the end of July when this comes out, probably. I don't know. Either way, as of filming, I have watched 4 of the Insidious films, of the 5th one having only recently been released in theatres, but I plan to watch it with my brother very, very soon. I guess it's worth grabbing out, of course. I have the Blu-ray set for the first 2 films, the 3rd film, and the 4th film. I don't remember why. I know I got these 2 from Zavvi, pretty cheap. I'm pretty sure I got Chapter 3 from Zavvi as well. I think the factor was I got the last key first, or I'd ordered the first, the trilogy pack, and then I actually bought the 4th one. And I picked that up for like $5 at JB, and then I had to wait like 3-4 weeks for the other films to come in, so that was very annoying. Anyway, let's talk about the Insidious films. When there'll be timestamps down below. Obviously, I guess spoiler reviews. Realistically, the old woman dies. That's basically the only spoiler outside of whatever happens in the 5th movie, which I haven't watched yet, so we'll get there when we get there. So yeah, God, I'm trying to remember what I usually talk about in these videos. I guess I'll just cover brief reviews on each of the films and give my thoughts as to what they are like, what they've done to horror film cinema and whatnot. Now, of course, these films are all written by Leigh Whannell, who directed the 3rd film. He's more notably known for Upgrade and The Invisible Man. The Invisible Man. And he did write Saw, which of course James Wan, who directed the first 2 of these films, also directed Saw, of course. He's a pretty well-known guy, Aquaman, Conjuring, that kind of stuff. They're all Aussies. It's great. So that's a fun little thing for me, I guess. And so Saw is a very impactful series as it is. It basically did not exactly a new genre, but popularized the murder mystery / overly gory torture porn genre, which I'm not exactly a fan of, but to each their own. They only basically did the first one, to my knowledge at least. At least I'm pretty sure they probably produced as well as whatever for the other sequels, but it doesn't matter. The Insidious film, of course, came out in 2010, written by Whannell, directed by James Wan. It's your pretty basic ghost haunting story. Oh look, my kid's fallen into a coma. Gee whiz, I hope he's not possessed by a demon. Not really, actually. It's a kind of different style, because it's not about the person being possessed. It's about the ghosts trying to possess him. You find out, of course, that, our main character, Josh, who's played by Patrick Wilson, with his wife, played by Rose Byrne, who plays a person called Renee, apparently. But weird spelling, an AI. Who would have thought? So their kid, falls off a ladder, happens to maybe see a demon thingy, goes into a coma land because he can sleepwalk, astral project, whatever, and he's been doing it for long enough that other entities have discovered him, and the dead people, whatever, because he's astral projecting into their universe, which they call the Further, and they want to take over his body because they want to be living again. That's the basic premise, that's the thing. You get the old woman who comes in and is like, hey, look, I got my ragtag team of guys who are gonna ghost hunt these ghosts. Yeah. Obviously Specs, played by Whannell, and Tucker, played by, I'm gonna have to look up the cast list. Look at me go. Bada bing, bada boom. I'll also do a ranking for these as well. I should probably have that. I don't know how much my ranking will change by the time I actually get around to talking about the 5th one, so that'll come at the very end of the video. Lynn Shay plays Elise. Raina, you get Ty Simpkins as Dalton, the kid. He's also in Iron Man 3. He's in a couple of films. So Leigh Whannell as Specs, Angus Sampson as Tucker. They're the only notable people, because, there's their other son, who no one cares about, their baby, who no one cares about, stuff like that. That's a consistent thing. I kind of am curious to see if anything changes in the 5th one. does the other son and the baby girl have anything to do with any of these stories? Because they have nothing to do with any of these stories. But yes, of course, Lin Shaye's character comes in. Elise, she can also astral project and whatever, and she's a medium. So they have to fight the ghost to bring her back. But of course, Patrick Wilson's character used to be able to do this as a kid until this old woman who was trying to possess him, and Lin Shaye, helped them out when they were younger. Bada boom, done. I'm doing all these weird things. This is the basic narrative of the whole first movie. It sets up the universe of the fervor, the astral projecting, shows a different style of ghost film where it's like, it's not just someone who's possessed Exorcist style, and it's not just a house is possessed Paranormal Activity style, which I find to be kind of commendable, because it's like, at this stage, you've had, 40 years since The Exorcist had come out, so that was a thing of its own. But even that is a style that I showed my brother that today, actually. The first Exorcist film, after having watched all these films, he even watched The Conjuring. He's like, oh, I gotta watch more of these kind of ghost films and whatever. I'm like, well, how about we watch The Exorcist? It's completely different. And it is. It's more of a drama. It's not really about the exorcism until it is in the final act, which is really interesting. But we're not talking about that, because of course when you get to 2010, you've already had, Paranormal Activity, you've had stuff like Poltergeist, had a whole bunch of different stuff that's come out, all these kind of ghost possession films, people, different universes, different dimensions, all this kind of stuff. Now, I noted in my review, which I gave, initially I gave the film, I watched it back in 2021, I didn't care much for it. I thought it was okay. My only annoyance with Letterboxd is that if you click the like button, it actually applies to all of your likings, all of your reviews for a film, which is really annoying, because it's like, maybe I like a film this time around, but I didn't like it the last time. Either way, my initial review back in 2021 was, what a classic goof when you get possessed and do the spooky stuff, but instead you get your dad possessed. Classic. What a great 3-star review that was. This time around I gave it 3.5 stars. I wouldn't say I'm overly critical of the film, but at the same time, I think the Conjuring films are better, for one thing. They're just, I think, better produced films. However, I do think Patrick Wilson is really good in these Insidious films. And Lin Shaye's great, But yes, so I said revolutionary in its style, but a clear riff on Poltergeist and The Changeling. I've been watching a lot of ghost movies for the past 2 months, and this is my summation. This movie is a rip-off of Poltergeist and The Changeling. The second half has some nicely tense stuff and some interesting moments, benefiting from one's directing. If not for the last act and the jump into the fervor, I don't think this would be as memorable, as momentous as it was upon release. Because on release it was the scariest goddamn movie of all goddamn time, until The Conjuring came out. That being said, I totally forgot they had 3 kids aside from the kid from Iron Man 3. The main benefit that this film has is that it's not just a jump scare after jump scare fest. It has atmosphere, it has tension, it lingers on characters and wide shots to make everything feel untrustworthy in the surrounding image. Sure, the loud, violent jump scares, are loud, but they are usually built up too nicely and leaving a lasting effect. Sleeping won't be easy this week, as my brother and I endeavour deeper into the fervor. We watched these in like 2 days. Literally the first night was the first movie. The second night, second, third, fourth. We'll get to the 5th one sometime soon. But I gave it 3.5 stars. Again, it's not a bad film. I think it's good. It's the benefit I think about it is the fact that, again, interesting characters, an interesting universe, more or less, over the interesting characters. Because its characters are fine. There's not too much to go into, but there's enough to keep you hooked. And then, of course, the scares are quite interesting. I like the wide shots. I like the use of that. The song that plays when that kid runs around, that's fun. The Red Demon dude, not bad. He's interesting when he's more in the shadows, when they use him in the latter half of the film, and they're like, look, he's kind of like the devil because he's half satyr. I'm pretty sure he's meant to be the devil. It's like, it's a bit much. The rest is fine. Yeah, the old lady who's coming after him, Patrick Wilson's character, that works well. All of the creepy smiles and the jumping and stuff, it works, So, and they really know how to create an atmosphere of the lighting and stuff like that. Like, the fervor looks really good for something that's mostly darkness. So, yeah, it's basically your primitive version of the Stranger Things The Upside Down, except not as cheap looking, I guess, even though this movie's a lot goddamn cheaper, budget-wise. These movies are really cheap, which were really cheap to make. Like, the second film's budget was like $5 million. It made like 160 odd million. Like, these movies make a lot of money because they're really cheap to make. I don't have too much else to say about it, but I will say that it benefits, again, from all that stuff, but also the fact that it's the first movie to really do this in an interesting style. Because you look at the Paranormal Activity movies, which, again, is the same kind of thing, and you can, again, look at Poltergeist and The Changeling and stuff that came 30 years before it that has clearly inspired this, but this has this modern touch that evolves them all together and nicely makes it something different, whilst also being enough of the same, you know? So, yeah, I just think that works for it. Again, it's an iconic thing for when it came out, but again, I don't think it hit as much for the wider populace, because I didn't know about Insidious until, like, the fourth one came out. Because I knew about the Conjuring films because they were the Conjuring, you know? You see the ad, you see the girl clapping, and it's like, oh my god, it's scary, you know? Classic ghost shit. But this one's completely different, and as much as I still think the Conjuring films are stronger, both narratively and horror-wise, I still think they're decently on par with the Insidious films, but, I mean, the first two Conjuring films are really good. The third one is fine. I kind of have to do a comparison because they're done by James Wan. The third one isn't, but still. Then we jump to 2013. A few months after The Conjuring has come out, and you get Insidious Chapter 2. This, again, directed by James Wan. I believe it's co-written by him. It's also now a Blumhouse film as well, so that's another thing that's worth noting. It's co-written by James Wan and Leigh Whannell. Leigh Whannell obviously did the characters, and I think he did the story. Or something like that. Like, they did the story, but Leigh Whannell wrote the script, that kind of stuff. It's not very specific on Letterboxd, unfortunately, but I remember that from watching the movie the other night. This one I didn't care as much for. I gave it 2.5 stars. It's fine. I'll dive into my review. It took them an hour and a half to start throwing things at the ghosts. That's an hour too long if you ask me. Like, literally, the amount of times me and my brother were just like, just throw something at the ghost. Like, they're just standing there in the middle of the goddamn room. Just throw something at it. I know nothing will happen. They'll just go through it like an apparition, but throw something. How much more fun would it be if you, instead of petrified, you're like, I'm going to grab this thingy, a little ashtray or something, something that's just lying around. Here's a plate. Fling. Do something fun. They do actually throw things at ghosts later in the film, but it takes way too goddamn long. Also, if you ask me what I learned narratively in this movie, and I said that the main ghost was a man in a mask, would you believe me? That's meant to be a Scooby-Doo reference, but quite literally that is what this movie does. Because that's what it is. Just a guy in a wig pretending to be Patrick Wilson, who is pretty great in this. Also, it's kind of funny, in a bad way, how much this film decides to be Back to the Future 2 in its narrative, except kind of pretentious and also a bad script. Leigh Whannell really hammed in this one for those easy bucks. I think they knew, potentially, I feel like, even though this probably isn't true, that the first one did decently, but, and they left it on a cliffhanger, kind of, basically, and they did The Conjuring, or at least James Wan did The Conjuring, and they're like, hey, let's do Insidious Chapter 2. Maybe the first Conjuring had come out and it was really successful, and they're like, good, here's the extra money to do the Insidious film. They did the Insidious, again, $5 million. They didn't need that much for it, but they chose to anyway. And it just feels cheap. Like, I don't remember most of the story outside of they're in the mother's house for most of it. Patrick Wilson's possessed by the old lady who, half of the film, they're trying to figure out who it is, and it turns out it's actually just a guy who was a serial killer who dressed up as a woman because his mother forced him to be a girl against his will. And yeah, it's kind of dull in a way. They introduce all these not extra characters, they introduce this other guy who's like, oh, he used to be friends with the girl who died at the end of the first film, and all this stuff. None of it feels grand. None of it feels like a great sequel. It just feels like we can do this. It feels almost obligatory because they had the ending set up, a new film. Let's continue the narrative and see where we can go. And it's still fine. It's not a great movie. It's okay. But yeah, I think in terms of the scare factor, a lot of the movie is still the same kind of loud noises and things running around the place, whatever. Like the best parts aren't even in the further at the end of the film. It's more or less when the wife keeps getting like tormented by ghosts, but it's when you find out by the end of the film, it's actually not random evil ghosts. It's, I mean, not really. It's, I think it's implied that it's Patrick Wilson the whole time because it's showing that it's him on the piano playing the music, but then is it other ghosts that are just scream with her? Like, would he do that to try and get her attention? Because I'm pretty sure it was him the whole time. Like, they go to the point of, by the end of the film, they're going into the further, which allows them to go to the first house during the first movie and all the ghost stuff that happened there. That a ghost that you didn't see was actually Patrick Wilson the whole time, and like knocking at the door and breaking in and everything and trying to protect his family from this other ghost. It's like cool, I guess. Again, very kind of wanky in a way in terms of it's, oh, what if we connected this to that film and all that stuff there was actually this film, and it can save us an extra couple of thousands of dollars by literally just reusing footage from the first movie. Yeah, I didn't care much for it. Because the second film ends with the main two characters forget. You know, they save the kid, they save the dad, all that stuff. And they, say goodbye to the old lady who's now in the further or whatever, because of course she's dead. And they use hypnosis to make them forget Patrick Wilson and his son about what happened, which I imagine they'll somehow remember for the fifth movie, because money. But it ends with the cliffhanger of, the two Ghostbuster dudes go to this new family's house, and the ghost of the old woman is there. She goes into the house and she hears a rattling, which is probably the red-faced dude, whatever the hell his name is. Yes, I know Jenna Ortega is in that scene. I don't care. But it was funny to point that out to my brother. I'm like, hey, look, it's Jenna Ortega. And he's like, oh my god, it is. I'm like, yeah, she is an actor. Who'd have thought it? Then you get to 2015, Insidious Chapter 3, which is clearly a Lee Whannell had the reins to just do whatever the hell he wanted because he was writing these films. So he figured he'd direct it. It's his film debut in terms of directing. I gave it 2 stars. I'm starting to think Lee Whannell is only able to rip off and not write anything original. This film is so much more of a circle jerk than the second film's, oh, those ghost moments in the first film were actually Josh in the second film. This one is so focused on the dumb prequel stuff that it can't focus on its own story, though to be fair, its own story is paper thin and full of cliches. The only good part was when Tucker sees the girl behind him through the night vision. That was a good laugh, like in a funny way, unlike the rest of the movie, which is painfully unfunny. They try a lot of humour in these films with Tucker and Specs, and my brother really likes the humour from them. I think they're much better in the fourth film, weirdly. They're okay in this one. I don't really care much for their characters, like in terms of as a comedic duo, but I can kind of like the lighting the tension a little bit. But yeah, it's the only good part. They've got a night vision camera on the girl to see, like, oh, if she's moving around or if she sees something in the room, they'll be able to see it. But instead it plays on that where the camera is moving throughout the house and they're like, oh my god, she's moving. A girl with broken legs is moving around the house and making no noise, and they go to find her and she's not in the hallway, and they go into the bedroom, the dad's bedroom, and they find out that the camera is in the wardrobe, the closet. They open it up, nothing there, and then he takes out the camera and the dad's looking at it, and the guy, Tucker, the big guy with now a mohawk, is looking at the camera in the vision and sees that there is a girl. The daughter is standing behind him, and he's like, ah! It's actually quite funny. It's surprisingly funny, actually. It's an effective joke. It's not really a scare. It's just an effective laugh. But yeah, this film, it's taken place 3 years before the first film. It's the prequel elements are all, oh, the old lady, she had a husband, her husband died. She has a dog. she's given up on the life of doing the medium stuff because every time she went into the other realm to save, contact the spirits, this old lady would keep attacking her and saying, "I'm gonna kill you." Because remember the first two movies and how she died because the old lady killed her. Yeah, it's the same old lady. It's really like the one that's actually a man. It's really annoying. that's really annoying. And so, then this is the main family who have called her. They can't help whatever. This girl keeps getting possessed, keeps getting attacked by this guy in a mask. Still creepy character effects and creature effects, which is pretty nice. Like, even when the girl gets hit by a car, it's completely out of the blue, and it was a decent scare. And quite brutal of a car crash, to be honest, like, when she gets fucking rammed by that car. Either way, yeah. The characters aren't that interesting anyway. So, of course, they after a bit, the dad calls per the son's suggestion. Do you know there's a son? This is another one of those films where there's a main character who's... Well, I mean, the main character's not the dad, but there's the dad and the daughter. Their mother has died, and there's a younger son who's, like, probably, like, 13, 14 maybe, I don't know. Either way, he's, like, not in the film that much, and it's kind of funny how he just is not there for so much of the movie. And when he is there, he doesn't really do much, except for be like, oh, we should get these Ghostbuster-like dudes because they have a web show. So that's what introduces the Ghostbuster dudes, as obviously Tucker and Specs. And they try to do their stuff and, again, get beaten up and realize this isn't great. And then the old lady just shows up. She's like, yep, I'm here. Howdy doody. Because the guy from the second film, who she used to work with, meets up with for dinner, is like, hey, I know this old lady ghost keeps saying she's going to kill you, but maybe you should just kind of keep helping people until she actually does kill you. So, yeah. And then she goes into the other realm, to the further, to save the girl. Has to fight the old lady spirit, which is really dumb. I know there's some of the fans on Letterboxd who like this film love the fact that she's like, oh, she has that Ellen Ripley moment where she's like, get away from her, you bitch. And it's like, yeah, but that just feels like a reference to Aliens rather than it being its own thing. A lot of this movie is not its own thing. It's just, remember the other movies? Look, loud noises, it's scary again. Remember the old movies? It's just dull. So yeah, this one ends with... I can't even remember what the hell it ends with. They obviously save the girl, whatever. She kills the old ghost thingy. And I think it ends with the old lady at home. And she sees... the demon, like, her dog starts barking down the hallway, and then the demon pops up behind her, like the red-faced demon. And that's it. That's where it ends, because it's like, oh, remember the red-faced demon? They keep showing this guy, and I'm like, he was in the first movie. Why does he keep showing up? He hasn't done anything else. So, of course, then we get to The Last Key. The Last Key is a 2018 film, again, written by Lee Whannell, if I'm not mistaken. Written by Lee Whannell and directed by Adam Robitek, who I really like his films, actually. I haven't seen The Taking of Deborah Logan, but I have seen both escape room films, including both versions of Escape Room Tournament of Champions, the longer cut and the shorter cut. I really like those films. I haven't seen the Taking of Deborah Logan, but he did that one first. Then he did Insidious 2018. Yeah, then he did Insidious, and then he did Escape Room, and then he did Escape Room 2. Yeah. I hope they do an Escape Room 3. I really like the Escape Room films. Anyway, so pretty trustworthy director, in my opinion. I wouldn't really say his films are horror films, though. They're more like, there's character stuff, it's more like thrillers, mystery thrillers, but still, I like them. So, Insidious The Last Key. I gave it 3.5 stars. Oh my god. What's that? I think it's the best one of the series? Holy shit. Yeah. Currently, it's my favorite of the series. It's kind of weird. Like, I still think the first one's maybe stronger as a horror film, because, and Juan's directing is just tremendous, but this one I really like as a character thing, and as a mystery. Again, it's a different style of film. This one is actually like, hey, what if the first half it presents itself as a ghost film, but then is actually like a murder mystery, and then it's not even really a murder mystery. It becomes a mystery crime film, and then it goes back into the ghost stuff for the latter half of the film because it's set it up at the start of the film. Because this film is fun and interesting and actually entertaining. Who would have thought? Again, this is coming off the second and third one, which are both meh. And this one's like, oh my god, this one's fun. So, as a prequel, this works well. As a standalone film, it works well as well. Insidious The Last Key does still play into the key scare tactics of the original three, but its focus on a tighter, more emotional and character-driven story makes the film worthy as an additional entry. The third film attempted to do the cheesy prequel spin whilst showing a new family, and neither element worked as well because they were both cliche and thinly written. This fourth film is tighter in its focus. It's a simple adventure film in Spookyland with the Ghost Hunter team. And while the story being about Elise could be a detriment, it does nicely add to her character and gives the film an emotional core regarding a character we know and somewhat care about, from having seen her in 3 other films, even though she's dead at the end of the first film, and she's a ghost in the second film, who basically shows up as a cameo, a glorified cameo, and the third film, she's alive because it's a prequel. This one is set like 6 months before the first film. And it really goes into her character well, and I think it works nicely for that. Sure, it's not over the top in its jump scares as the previous 3, but I like that. It's not rinse and repeat, and when it does do that, it plays on expectations and lets things linger and play out before the eventual scare happens. Usually still with the loud someone hitting their head on the piano. Yeah, like that. So, it lets things linger and lets things play out with the before the scare eventually happens. With most of these scares actually affecting the story and the characters in a vital way. And none of the additional characters feel useless or wasted. They all play their roles and are vital to the story and the character journey of Elise. Now that being said, this is like her brother and her nieces, and her brother, they don't really flesh out the story too much with the distance between her and her brother. It's established, it's continued. There's not a lot of resolution, not really, but there kind of is. They argue it out basically by the end. And even the nieces, one becomes the victim, one can astral project. There's not a lot of character work put into them, but at the same time, you get enough that's there. They're family of hers that she doesn't know existed. They're just kind of people, but they're not just kind of 2D. I don't know. They're not the best written characters, but at the same time, it's not a very long film. It doesn't have the extra 10 minutes to set up their characters or flesh them out a bit more to make you care more about them. It just puts them in the position of, this one's the victim, this one's the savior, it's gonna work. And, I mean, it does. So, that helps. Sure, the savior one becomes more of a romantic interest for Specs, which is a bit weird because he's the writer of the goddamn movie. And the romance there is not really there, so I kind of understand why she's not in the first one. If you are going to be that kind of a person who's like, well, this is 8 years later than why is she not in the next one? Why is the brother not referenced? Because it doesn't matter. Because these movies benefit when they're like the first 2 Indiana Jones films. They're just adventure films. Basically. I mean, the first film is less of an adventure film, more of a ghost spooky stuff. And then the adventure stuff comes in at the end. The third film is kind of trying to be an adventure film, but also a narrative film. It doesn't work. You're either one or the other. You're either the first Insidious film or you're the fourth Insidious film. There's no in between, because they tried it with both the second and third film and it didn't work. But still, they made a lot of money, so they could keep going. So yeah, the fourth film, basically it introduces Elise as a kid. They live next to a jail where people get electrocuted to death, of course. And she can still see ghosts. And her mother is like, you shouldn't be saying that you can see ghosts because your dad doesn't like it because he's scared of it. And she gets trapped in a basement because she keeps seeing ghosts. Ghosts keep haunting her and her brother. And of course the dad doesn't like that, locks her in the basement. She ends up, a ghost tells her to open this door. The door happens to lead to this demon dimension with this key demon. They don't really give it a name or anything. And even in the alternate ending, which my brother and I did watch, when he gets defeated, he turns into a pile of keys, which is really cool, but they don't do that in the theatrical cut. Instead, he just gets, like, whacked with a lantern, and he just goes flying away into the darkness. Which I think is a kind of weaker way to end his character. They easily could have turned him into a pile of keys, which I thought would have been really cool. The visual is great in the original ending. But then in the original ending, it's also really rushed in its edit, and it's emphasized, oh, the girl who can, the niece who can, project, you're the key, you were the last key the whole time, you were the last key we needed to fix this puzzle. It doesn't make any sense, it's bad. I see why they didn't go with that ending, thank God. Either way, it's, as in just dialogue exchanges like that, it's really cheesy. Mother coming out of nowhere as a ghost, none of it works. Even with the extended, oh, they unlock all the doors and all the ghosts get to be free now. It's like, but who are these people? Where did they come from? Where did they go? Aren't they just dead people from the prison? What the hell's going on? It's a lot of weird shit. Why put in that stuff if you're not going to kind of elaborate more on what happens? It's kind of meant to be implied that it doesn't matter, that they're free now, they can go back to their souls, their spirits, their bodies, whatever, but, or at least they can be free as spirits. They don't do that in the theatrical ending. The theatrical ending ends with them escaping. They go through one red door. They see the kid from the first film. He looks at them. They realize, no, this isn't my house, and they leave, but they don't close the door, which I think is meant to imply that the demon comes through that door. But the demon was on the other side in the original movie. So, I don't know what that's all about. I don't know if that's meant to be a reference that it's Elisa's fault that he gets possessed. I don't really know. Because the red demon dude was never following him anyway. Like, her anyway. Like, he was already following the kid prior to the events of, by looks of it, this film. Like, months before the events of The Last Key, at least. If not years. So anyway. So yes. She unlocks the door. Mum gets killed. Flash a bit forward. That she thinks she sees another ghost. I'm not going to spoil the plot of this one. I think the plot's really interesting. It basically just means it's basically a film just about Elise going back to her home, rediscovering her traumas and stuff like that, having to relive them, having to deal with them, to grow from them and stuff. What they think is a ghost, but there's also other stuff that isn't ghost stuff, and that's the really interesting stuff. Again, makes it a crime film. And again, when they're gonna go deeper to solve all and save the spirits of the people who have been murdered there, they're like, that's when it becomes more of a ghost film, and that's when they, need the sister, and actually they discover a bunch of bodies and stuff. If I'm not wrong, does she get possessed there? Yeah, she does, doesn't she? No. Okay, I've actually forgotten how the plot goes in particular. So I remember them leaving the place, and she's talking to the policeman in the interrogation room, whatever, and she sees the spirit of like her niece. Jump scare moment, pretty good scare, to be honest. And she realizes that, oh no, her family has now gone back to the house that has the ghosts, and it's gonna very malevolent. I was going to say malevolent, whatever that word is. And, they end up going back there. The younger, I think, of the two daughters gets attacked by the creature, and I really like how it uses the key to stop it, to lock her throat so she can't scream, she can't make any noise, and then it, locks her heart to basically kill her. But she basically goes comatose so it can take her soul and imprison it and whatever. So there are just nice ideas like that they do. They're creepy, they linger, it's nice, it takes its time to do its scares and really builds the atmosphere again. It's not as effective, I think, directorially as Wan with his style, but at the same time I still think it's quite nice. Yeah, and of course the plot happens. For me, what I like about these films is when they're actually about what's quote-unquote insidious, this evil that lurks underneath kind of deal, and that how that can affect people. And that's really emphasized. Like, the first one kind of has that with the this emphasizing it as like the insidious nature of like the ghost trying to possess the humans and whatever, and how that's, I think that's what they're trying to imply as the insidious nature of it. So hence it's a ghost possession thing. Can do the same thing in the second one, where again it's an insidious behavior because it's the ghost has possessed Patrick Wilson's character. Third one, it's trying to do the same, but not really. But the fourth one, I think it actually works the best because it's the influence that these evil spirits have on people over long periods of time, and even over short periods of time. You know, her dad being abusive and what eventually happens to him if you've seen the plot. Same as the guy who's currently living in the place who gets them to help him to get rid of the ghosts. That kind of stuff. Like, when you see what the ghosts have done in effect to these guys, it makes it more interesting, you know. It makes, because it shows that these people aren't inherently bad people. It's because of the influence of, again, insidious fucking creatures. It's not insidious creatures. What is the definition of insidious? Insidious means proceeding in a gradual, subtle way, but with very harmful effects. So, yeah. Again, proceeding, yeah, gradual, yeah. No, so I think the insidious part of the first film was they're slowly talking to the kid and befriending the kid and then possessing the kid. That's the insidious nature of it. Whereas in the fourth one, the insidious nature is different, where it's like it's manipulating the guys to do bad things over time and making them do worse and worse things as time goes on. So, yeah. Anyway, let's take a look at the fifth film. Okay, it is time for the fifth movie. This is Insidious, Chapter 5. They don't call it Chapter 5, they just call it The Red Door. It's a fun fact to note, between filming, I got a head cold, so I feel like absolute crap. But I still went out and watched this movie. Luckily, there was no one in the cinema. It was just me and my brother. Given that him and I had been watching all these movies, it only seemed right to go and watch the last one together. Whether or not this is the last one, debatable. It still has a post-credit scene. There will be spoilers, I guess. I mean, obviously. If you want a basic idea of what I think of the film, I gave it 3 stars. I liked it. Thought it was pretty decent. It's not the worst thing I've seen. It depends on your mood for these movies. If you like these movies for being over-the-top jump scare fests, this maybe ain't for you. If you don't like plot and character and story, stuff that makes films interesting, this isn't for you. In my opinion, if you liked the kind of style of The Last Key, you might like this one. If you didn't like The Last Key, you might think this one's a bit better than it, because it has the main cast from the first few films, even though Lynn Shaye is the only reason to watch any of these movies anyway. But at the same time, you know, it is what it is. So now let's just get into the spoilers. Again, yeah, so this is The Red Door. It's directed by Patrick Wilson. You know, we all know this. It's his directorial debut. He also sang the song in the end credits. Hooray. It's not bad. It's a direct sequel to the second one, so if you want to skip the worst one being the third one, and the best one being the fourth one, then go for it, do whatever you want. But I thought it was alright. It didn't seem like a story that needed to happen per se, but it was an interesting dissection of what the events of the first 2 films have caused for the family, you know, because the 2 main characters have forgotten what happened. It's caused a lot of issues where, like, you know, the kids have trauma from the fact that their dad tried to kill all of them. There's all these different elements that has broken up the family, that has disconnected them all. Patrick Wilson's character in particular, Josh, has had this fog for the past 9 years, because obviously as an adult, having all this removed, like a whole year of his life removed, it's kind of ruined him as a person. Like, he just doesn't kind of understand who he is, what he's doing anymore. He's lost away with himself. So there's stuff like that that's really interesting, I guess. Because it doesn't go down the avenue of, oh, these people were perfectly fine after, you know, they had their mind wiped. No, it's screwed up. They are in bad condition. Nevertheless, let's get on to my review. So my review for Letterboxd, I said, next time on Insidious Chapter 6, the other brother, Dalton's nameless brother, gets to have a side quest. Yes, I have noticed people commenting on how there is a line where Dalton, on the phone to his younger brother, says, help me out, little brother, in like the most this isn't realistic dialogue ever. Like, I don't refer to my younger brother Noah as my younger brother unless I'm referring to him as someone else. Like, to you, the audience, because you don't know who he is. I could be referring to my colleagues like, hey, yeah, my younger brother Noah, or my younger brother. I don't call him little brother. I'm not a derogatory piece of shit. No. Only ever people to refer to my brother as younger or little brother, even though it's just younger. He ain't little. He's like 6 foot. He's taller than me. So, Nevertheless, credit where credit is due. It's not an over-the-top fright fest like the first two films, but it is a film that begs to ask, maybe trauma-themed horror is the only horror. I do like that it tells a story and endeavours to wrap up the narrative of the first two films better than the second film did. The cameos were cute and the final 20 minutes or so were pretty neat in terms of creature designs and atmosphere. Third best entry in a series of so-so horror films, but I mean, that's kind of okay with me. Like, yes, I like character and plot over constant jump scares, which were few and far between in the element of most of them were like, when there were jump scares, they weren't just jump scare. It was slowly built up to, and in different ways. Sometimes you could tell, like, in the atmosphere of the film that they were leading up to a jump scare. They're clear and obvious. It's dark. There are creepy noises. Eventually, there's going to be a creature in the darkness that's just going to make you go spooky scary. But then there's the occasional thing, like where Patrick Wilson's character, and this is set up throughout the film, where there's part at the start of the film where he's texting his son, and you're just focusing on him, but in the center of the frame, because he's off-center like I am now, in the center of the frame there's a figure, blurry, it keeps going closer and closer and closer, but there's no payoff to it. It's creepy, it's kind of amusing to watch, because you're like, oh shit, there's gonna be a jump scare, it's probably just gonna be a regular dude, and then nothing happens. But then you cut to, like, I don't know, an hour later, and Patrick Wilson's character again is he's got all these windows set up, like in his house, and he's got these cardboard flaps that he's bringing up and putting down, whatever. They've got images of people he knows, so he's trying to, I think he's trying to, use a hypnotism thing. He's trying to, do a psychic reading, trying to understand, if he can find, the picture of his mother, if he can find a picture of his son, and try to remember where they are, but then also, by shuffling it, find them despite that factor. And every time he'd open up the middle one, there would be a character in the background, walking towards the camera. Again, out of focus and whatever, but in a yellow kind of jumpsuit, so very odd for the time period, but that's for a good reason. It is the ghost of his dad, who then, of all things, just jumps through the window and chases him. It's kind of funny, because it's like, okay, sure, there's elements where it's it kind of makes you question at one point, is it realistic is there anything else I want to mention? No, outside of the factor of someone's head falling on the piano over 5 minutes. That was funny. They don't do that in this movie, and I like that. They do that in the other movies. But anyway, it's one of those things where I would question on the occasion, to what degree do the spirits and whatever touch in with the real world? But again, it's always when the main characters have some kind of I'd say metaphysical presence, when they're an essence of themselves is in or in touch with the other world. Whether that be in the previous films where they're all in a circle doing that chanting thing. What do you call that thingy? I can't remember. But when they're trying to get in touch with the metaphysical world, with the ghost world, whatever. But then there's obviously when they're doing their sleepwalking and their thingy. My brain not working today, but that thing that's not well known in this series of films, to the point that they explain it yet again in this movie with a YouTube video of the characters from the previous films, including Lee Jay coming back as a 2-minute cameo in a thing talking about this is what the fervor is, and this is what this is. And I can understand why they did that, because it's hey, we get cameos, it's amusing, whatever, but also it allows the characters and the actors to come back, but it allows the main characters, especially Dalton, who doesn't remember any of this shit because he had his mind wiped, to know what the hell it is, explained by the people who did it to him, as in removed it from him. So that's not bad, why not? But that element of having his dad come through the window, I'm Was that real in the end? Was that like, did actually happen? Like, they never really go back to that. He never really was that a real thing that his window was just broken into? Um, yeah, but I think it's because he was every time he started the timer, he was trying to access this world to try and figure out these things. So yeah, it's more subtle. It's not as obvious as to that's why it's happening. But at the same time, you've also got the ghost of his dad earlier in the film, but then his dad vanishes as a ghost. So I think that was just a context for setup for later payoff in the film. Wasn't exactly that he was connected to that world, but that like the world was still trying to connect to him. In this case, his dad's ghost, now that his mum was dead, was trying to connect to him. So yeah, I mean, plot for plot's sake, I'm not always a fan of films that go into, look, teenagers doing that thing where they go to university and do frat housing. We don't have that in Australia, thank God. University culture in Australia is the most boring thing imaginable, which is wonderful. It's either you have to actively choose to do stuff for the most part, but I would go to school, learn, go home, hang out with friends, but I wouldn't go to parties. I wouldn't try to track down clubs and stuff. I only had one club, and it was a David Lynch club that me and my friends, including two of the teachers, set up because we all like David Lynch. That was as far as I went with extracurricular stuff for university. But in this for college, it's look, you gotta go to the frat house and get drunk. And the only thing I really liked about that, because it was obviously goofy that like these guys were still trying to be like, yeah, we're men, and they're dressed like babies. Like I found that kind of like almost kind of political correctness kind of humor, like funny, like how it's like this kind of feels like it's a film written by 30 to 40-year-olds who are trying to show a younger audience, but instead they kind of make a commentary on how yeah, they're trying to just reprise old traditions that are made by older people that fucking suck. And, the emphasis on the fact that, like, well, we're going to make sure it's safer than last time when that guy died. Let's just not talk about it out loud again, even though they keep talking about it. And then, of course, you see his ghost and he's just thrown up on himself. And I'm like, having literally experienced the party last weekend, because my brother had a house party, and having seen 3 different people throwing up in bathrooms, it's like, yeah, no, that happens, and it's kind of funny how, like, that was, like, my response to that, just thinking of my brother who's sitting next to me. I'm like, that was you a few days ago. So, that was funny. But yeah, I liked the creature designs like that. I liked how, the fact that it was him basically going into a hypnosis state in terms of Dalton when he's in the art class. Obviously still pretentious art shit, which is, like, fine. It's art school. It makes sense. It's pretentious, that's the point. But I like how it's like he goes into the other world and what the hell do they call it? The astral plane. He astral projects and does art. And I'm like, that's kind of cool that he just does that. But that allows him to access those memories of the door and everything. And of course the demons are able to find him. Obviously, yes, the red lipstick-faced demon, whatever the hell they call it, has come back. The red door is back. More in a metaphorical essence, like the door in this other dimension rather than being a real door. I don't think it ever was a real door. I'm pretty sure it's always just been a, door in the astral plane. I like how they brought back the same music from the first film. I like how they added some extra stuff to it to, like, give some more context and stuff. How, like, this demon was so focused on this guy's life and this guy's memories in this time that he literally just made them into designs over, like, the past 9 years. I was like, eventually he'll come back and I'll show him what happened when he forgot, and while he's distracted by it, I'm gonna take his body. And that's what he does, and I'm like, that's fucking cool. Like, they're both, like, art majors. It's like, that's kind of funny. So, respect. But also, I love the fact that they, because, I mean, even the first film, he's, like, making himself claws and stuff. He's got a whole workshop. But they don't explain who he is. They don't explain what the fuck he is, where it comes from, anything outside of it. Wants to just possess something of the living, and that's it. And it does. It possesses Dalton. And he tries attacking the girl, and then has to escape back into the astral plane world to deal with Josh, because Josh has gone into the astral projection now. He's going to find his son and figure out what the hell's going on and fight this demon. And I like that stuff about it. Like, the second half of the film I really, really liked. I still liked the first half. It was a bit slow. I was like, come on, bring on the horror already. But then when the horror started, I was like, oh, this is what they're doing with the horror. Okay, doing the slow build stuff. And then the loud noises. I can dig that, you know? Sure, why not? It's my preferred style of that instead of constant noises and whatever the crap. I don't mind it, but I think it makes it more terrifying in my opinion. But, because I mean, as it is, horror, much like comedy, completely subjective. So, yeah, I do like to contrast this with this Chapter 2, given how Chapter 2 is like, we're doing a continuation to a cliffhanger, we're gonna tell you what happens when you're possessed, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that, talk about ramifications from the previous film. It's basically a better version in my mind of the second film, where the main character gets possessed, there's destructive behavior, there's repercussions from trauma, but the one thing the Red Door does that the second chapter doesn't do, is that it doesn't explain who the Red Demon dude is. It doesn't go into backstory. It doesn't be like, oh, we're going to discover that the Red Demon was actually a little child who had a really bad time when he got face painted with red and all this bullshit that we don't need. Like how the second film did that. It was like, oh, this woman is actually a guy who was like traumatized by his mother. Spooky stuff. I'm like, what the fuck? This just looks like a cartoon now. You know? The Red Door is like, fuck that stuff. Let's just make it about how he's terrifying and that's it. You know? They probably could have made him scarier to some degree in different angles, but at the same time, they utilized him, I think, just enough. You know, if you overutilize a character, it can be tiresome. Like, think of the end of the second film, how the Red Demon thing is still kind of there. And they don't tie off that, you know, end thread. They just were like, fuck that story. We're not falling into paranormal investigators anymore with Ghost Lynch, which I kind of would have preferred. That would have made for a much more interesting film if they ended up crossing over like that. Like, if they were able to, like, go that hard into it, I feel like they could have just been like, I don't know how I would have rewritten this film, but if you wanted to combine them, I feel like it could have been that, I don't know, maybe the paranormal investigators quit because they just weren't getting the same kind of reception without Lynch Shay's character, because after that interaction with those people who have been like followed, it's implied that it's the Red Demon. I don't think it's visually shown, it's just implied. And maybe she's been trapped by the demon. Nothing happens. She's fine. She's just there. She shows up at the end of the film as a ghost, just in the middle of the street. Me expecting Josh to get hit by a car or something, you know, like, it seems fine. Like, they don't really conclude that, you know, cliffhanger at the end of the second film, which is it's a bit of a gap, but it is what it is, you know. Like, I don't know. I guess maybe it wasn't the Red fucking Demon dude. I guess it doesn't really matter. But still, it is what it is. Even the fact that in this one they have Carl come back and whatever, just as a little cameo, like, oh, I was friends with your mother, and then he fucks off. It's like stuff like that where it's like this is history that, you know, from the first two films that are there, but that just the main characters can't touch on. Like, even that's why, you know, Rose Byrne isn't in the film that much, because she's so connected with that past that she can't interact with them that much. Like the younger brother, it doesn't matter. What the hell is the younger brother's name? I love too how they had the daughter in this one, and she's like, you know, 10, 11 years old or whatever, and it's just, she has like one line of dialogue where she says she misses her grandma, and that's it. She's never shows up for the rest of the movie, and I'm like, this is great. Fuck these other siblings, they're like so unimportant to this franchise. So, yeah, they have elements like that that I still enjoy. I did quite enjoy the film. Again, still 3 stars, but yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of people are overblowing what they expected from the film, because they're like, oh, it's a waste of time because of this and that. It's like, look, if you realize that you're not going to, like, if you go with the expectation that you're going to get the first Insidious all over again, a film written by you know, Lee Winnell and directed by James Wan. Two things this film isn't. They produce it, and Lee Winnell does the story, co-writes the story for this movie, but none of this film seems like it's referenced to earlier films, like in terms of like prior to Insidious. Like, you look at the first 2 Insidious films and you see like, oh yeah, these are clearly like inspired strongly by like Poltergeist and Back to the Future and stuff like that. Like, there's a lot of obvious like homages and rip-offs that narratively are there, which again, I think I'd argued earlier that maybe Lee Whannell's a bit of a hack. But at the same time, this one isn't that because it's not done by the same people. And I don't mind that. But overall, my ranking is The Last Key. It's my favourite of the series, followed by the first one. Probably the best of the films and the scariest, but I just love the story of The Last Key. I like the emotion behind it. I like the characters. Followed by The Red Door, then probably Chapter 2, and then Chapter 3. So, Chapter 3 is the only one I'd argue is worth skipping. The rest of them are worth watching, I guess, if you like this kind of horror. The third one's just crap, so... Anyway, thanks for watching a Calm and Relax talk about the Insidious films. Check out my other Calm and Relax talk films, videos and stuff that I do of other films and stuff. Playlist on screen. Outside of that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time, where I talk about other stuff that's spooky scary. I don't know. We'll see. Adios.